Hey guys and girls, welcome back. This is your boy Mark, and this is part 6 of our seemingly never-ending Tiermaker challenge. Guys, what's crazy is this is the 6th hour of recording, and we're nowhere near touching the bottom of this list. And that doesn't even count the literal hours of research that goes into these videos, trying to give you the best experience possible, the most factual experience possible. And I think that last video was by far the toughest to date. I think I grew like 1,001 gray hairs just doing that part. That being said, if you enjoyed this, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and let's pick up where we left off last time. Alright, so let's do what we always do when we do what we do. And let's take a look at who charted last on the list. And that is none other than Australia's pride and glory, the progressive Caligula's horse, with a well-earned D tier rating for lack of significance and consistency. Now moving on to our first band of the day, and that is Cancer. I mean, they don't have cancer, they just are cancer. That being said, they have an incredible looking logo, and I really don't know why I'm so stuck on logos. But this is an older extreme / death metal band from England. They were around the same time as Napalm Death, Benediction, Bolt Thrower, somewhere at that end of the 80s, extreme aggressive form of heavy metal music. This band was really has a tragic history if you want to know about it. They were only together for a couple of, years, a few years, released a couple of albums and then died. They just split up. And they were dormant for many years. I want to say probably over a decade or more. And then they reformed, I want to say in 2013. And honestly, they've went straight under the radar since. Even when they were active in their original form, they were only really extremely well received in their home in England. That sort of popularity did not get reciprocated overseas because honestly, they were being severely overshadowed by the reigning titans of the subgenre. Even though they were accredited to beginning the movement of extreme metal that eventually formed death and grindcore, these guys just never saw enough light of day. They died very young after like maybe 1 or 2 albums, and then they stayed underground. People slept on them, and honestly, nobody has warmed up to them since they're back. Their listener pool, and honestly, trying to find a fan pool for this band was also incredibly difficult because the numbers are that small. Despite being a character of that revolutionary extreme metal movement at the end of the 80s in England, these guys just really didn't chart up. And I'm not sure if they're still together or not, and for those reasons, they are an F. Again, they're not F because they're bad, they just never got any love. They flew straight under the radar and slept there. Alright, this is the first I can't read it logo of the day, and that is Carpathian Forest. I've never heard of it. I like the design of the logo though. Goes straight into no context. Now this next band is a band that I'm familiar with. I used to listen to them, and that is Cathedral, another great legendary British band. I used to listen to them back in the day, and I was really fond of their style. They are a doom metal band. And honestly, when I was doing research on these guys a little while ago, they are a lot younger than I thought they were. I thought they were part of that OG doom metal movement. And because of their sound, there was a lot of, progressive and a lot of Sabbath influences. And honestly, their style is very reminiscent of Candlemass from the 80s. And I thought they were of the same time period, but they were actually a thing of the 90s. This is another band, sort of like the Benediction, Napalm Death sort of deal. The lead singer, Lee Dorian, was the prior singer of Napalm Death. After he exited the band, he formed Cathedral with some friends and some other musicians in the area. And it was a very different form of music. And honestly, these guys received a lot of accolades, but they flew straight under the radar. More so than I imagined, because you do hear about them at times. They did have some very significant releases. Their first record The Force of Equilibrium was probably one of the most noteworthy albums of the doom metal genre. It's what got them noticed at the beginning, but their magnum masterpiece, their opus, what they're remembered by is The Ethereal Mirror. And that is considered probably one of the most influential and most coveted albums of the whole doom metal movement. These guys also kind of have suffered from local significance. Yeah, they really didn't get a whole lot of love spread out across the globe, whether it's here or overseas. However, their fan base, those that do listen to them, are absolutely adamant behind them. There is still a lot of love for them. So this one is kind of another one of those gray hair inducing artists, if you would. I'm going to have some trouble placing this, and no matter where I place it, I'm really not going to be too fond of it, but I have to look at facts. The real big problem with Cathedral, in my opinion, as far as this list goes, is you have a band that had limited attention and limited availability worldwide, limited influence. But this smaller band produced some of the most seminal records of the genre, so that makes them incredibly hard to place. But you really don't hear about them much anymore. It's one of those contributions versus active legacy sort of things. Active legacy they really don't have, but contributions are well documented and they are revered. But I've got to say, to me, they float between D and C. I feel like their contributions put them at a higher tier, but the relevance keeps them down bottom. I did not mean to do that. So I'm going to put them at the end of the C tier. And no, this is not because of my personal preference here, but when it comes down to it, even though they never quite made it as big as some of the other titans of the genre, their contributions, although they were, limited, there were few, they were very well spoken for and they were highly influential, which I feel like the power of their music has spoken farther than their career. And because of that, they are a C tier, but they're like a C minus. They're verging on that C and D line. If you guys put them at a D tier, personally I will be upset because I like them a lot. But factually, I can't be upset about it because, they could really, really belong in either category. So a low C tier ranking for Cathedral. What does that even say? That is Cenotaph or Cenotaph. I've never heard of it. And guys, please, as I always ask of you, borderline beg of you, any sort of factual information on these no context bands, these obscure to me or, rather underground bands, if you have any information on them, please let me know in the comments. So eventually I can place them where they belong on the map and do the necessary research. Or if you love or hate them, just let me know because in general, I like hearing from you guys. The next band needs really no introduction. This is Converge. You want to talk about one of the most relevant names in modern metal. This band has got over 20 years in the business, probably closer to 30 by now. And they are one of the OGs that created that metalcore movement. They were one of the very first bands to pioneer that extreme form of heavy metal in the U.S. Basically, if it wasn't for Converge in 1990 doing what they did, all these other bands that have been reigning for like the past 15, 20 years wouldn't exist because they put it into a platform and then popularized it. Not only did they help pioneer it, they put it mainstream. And their work is still incredibly easily accessible and available. People are still listening to them. They're more relevant than ever. These guys not only are the old titans, they're still titans of the new and current. And they're not going anywhere. And their body of work pretty much speaks for itself. It's its own legacy that continues to be discovered, revered, and, just held dear in the metal community today. There's hardly any bands that are as essential and influential for modern music and metal than Converge. So they get an S tier rating. Crash Diet. Now, it's been a while since I heard about these guys. They were getting some positive love in that 2010, 2011, 2012. That's when I first learned about them. I had a lot of friends sharing their music. Um, they were okay. I mean, they're not a band that I actually picked up and listened to on my own, but I heard some things about them, and it wasn't terrible. Some of the stuff was good. I would kind of consider them like a Swedish modern Motley Crue. They had a lot of the glam metal and a lot of the hair metal elements with a lot of melodic rock. So these guys could really be either rock or metal, but they are, in my opinion, they were too heavy to be rock, but they were at that poppy end of heavy metal. Again, it was like Motley Crue in a new millennium. And the unfortunate thing is this band has just gone through so many changes. I don't feel like they consistently cemented an audience here in the U.S. This band is younger, and they've already been through 4 singers. Lineup changes here and there. I mean, usually their reviews are generally positive. The fans really love them, but the fan pool is actually limited. And honestly, people aren't really talking about them, at least here in the States that I know of, very much. So that kind of speaks to their wane of popularity and consistency. I don't feel like they revolutionized anything. I feel like their music was great to listen to if you wanted to have a good time. And it was good for us old school people that love those old school glam and hair bands. I unashamedly admit that I love them. So it was great for me to hear a band that was throwing back to the 80s where hair was big and guitars were loud and you could be happy and have high energy music. And it was just really great to see that they had the look, they had the sound, but honestly, they did not have the audience or really the legacy that was very consistent. They didn't really revolutionize anything. And for that, unfortunately, they get an F tier rating. They're a great band, don't get me wrong, but they didn't contribute much. And in the short time that they've been here, they have revolved so much. They're just not a consistent band. And unfortunately, that leaves a lot to be desired when it comes to, range of influence and significance. All right, down to the next band, and that is Crypta. Oh, I could actually read that. But unfortunately, I don't know anything about Crypta, so that's going straight into no context. Now, this next band you hear about a lot. This is Cryptopsy. This is a Canadian death / extreme technical death metal band. This is actually one of the biggest extreme metal bands to come out of Canada. These guys are huge here in the U.S. They're massive overseas. They've been around for quite a while. They really aren't revolutionary. Okay, they didn't reinvent the genre. I think for Canada, because Canadian bands I've noticed struggle a lot to maintain relevance here in America. That's nothing that's disrespectful in any way, but it's just a trend that I'm noticing. Canadians really have a hard time breaking through in America. They have a better time breaking overseas than here. I don't know what the gap is there, but unless you're absolutely revolutionary, you don't really get to do that so often. But I feel like Cryptopsy beat those odds. They still have massive tours. They're still relevant. They're marginally influential. Did they reinvent the wheel? No. But as much as you hear about them, and honestly, the press about this band is so good, you don't really hear much negative about them. Their listener pool on Spotify is kind of but their social medias are actually quite big, so they do have a good presence across the world, especially here in America. And for that, I want to give them a B. They are a very strong, respected band that's really consistent, very available, and people look up to them, and they're very much a best-in-class sort of band. So I'm giving Cryptopsy a B. It's been a while since we did a B. I think the last B band was Seven Dust. That's been a minute. Cynic. If you guys watch like the past video or two, then you know where these guys are headed. These guys are probably the most prolific, legendary, progressive, extreme death metal band from Florida. Part of that Florida death metal scene that revolutionized literally everything. I think Cynic is still active today. I mean, they've been through a lot of tragedy, a lot of hard times, and Cynic was born out of death. Both Paul Masvidal, I hope I'm saying that right, and then Sean Reinert were both, I think, involved in death between the either Symbolic or the Human albums, and then after that they formed Cynic. And these guys have a legacy that is honestly competitive to death. They are extremely influential. They are one of the top names in the extreme and progressive metal genres. Today, the buzz around Paul Masvidal, if I'm saying that right, is huge. There are so many young bands and so many young people that are picking this stuff up and worshiping it just as they were in the 90s and throughout the decades. They've created a legacy that has transcended time and adversity. These guys are just as important as they were when they were in death, even more important now with their own band. And for that, I feel like Cynic is deserving of an S tier rating. Okay. Dark Tranquility. You want to talk about the Gothenburg Trio? Here we are. This is part 3 of the Gothenburg Trio. Of course, you hear about at the Gates and In Flames, and there was a little band called Dark Tranquility that was incredibly influential, part of that wave, one of the pioneers of the melodic death metal movement. Unfortunately, the one bad part about this band is they got snowed by At the Gates in particular, and then In Flames, and they kind of got buried in that sort of craze, because Slaughter of the Soul was monumental for that Swedish death metal movement. But that being said, Dark Tranquility? Sorry, I forgot the name. Is really a legendary band, one of the stalwarts of the genre, highly influential, but they never did reach the kind of heights as the prior 2 bands I mentioned. But since they are part of that legendary Gothenburg Trio, and they are highly influential and still kicking, I'm going to put them at an A tier. I don't mind putting them in S tier, honestly, because I feel like because of their contributions, I feel like they could live there. But when you talk about bands like In Flames and At the Gates, they really can't sit with them, really, because they never reached those heights. At the Gates and In Flames broke all kinds of boundaries. In Flames is still doing it today. At the Gates is back, and that was a huge thing. I think out of all of them, I do believe In Flames won the biggest. I feel like At the Gates was the most influential, and then Dark Tranquility. So for those reasons, Dark Tranquility gets an A, but that's an A+++. And if you want to yoke them into the S tier, then that's more than fine, because I feel like they could live there just fine. All right. What is this? Deathspell Omega. Okay. Well, Omega don't know anything about them. That goes straight into no context. And the next artist is one of the ones that we've already previously discussed, and I want to say part 3 of the saga, and that's Dee Snider. This is his solo work. Not to be confused with any of his other bands, especially Twisted Sister. Now, Dee Snider in general is a highly influential figure. We've already covered that. His solo music is only marginally popular, not super influential. Again, he cannot outrun his shadow with Twisted Sister. But I'll be honest with you, his solo stuff is incredible. Unfortunately, I want to say a year or 2 ago, I think he made an announcement saying basically he's probably stepping away from music. He feels like those last 2 records he released were probably the way to end his career. While that's said, and while Dee Snider is a highly respected and influential member of the metal community, while his solo work is highly revered, often described as very good work, I like it. It just never reached the same heights, and honestly, he's not put the same amount of work in it. And if you feel like you're done, you're done. He's been in the music business for a very long time. He left with grace, exited in style. I love Dee Snider. I hope you do too. But his music is a D tier band. I don't think it's deserving of an F because of just how much buzz it created when it was around, especially that first record, like the 2018 record, For the Love of the Hurricane, I do believe, or Love of the Storm. Um, that was great stuff. I saw the videos on YouTube. He sounds incredible, and it was, he's widely celebrated, but well, there wasn't enough time, and I don't think there's going to be another Dee Snider record. So it's not going to reach those heights, but they were very strong, very, very real metal albums, true metal albums. And I've got nothing but love and respect for Dee. So Dee gets a D. Huh. Destruction. Okay. You guys remember a little story about the Big Four of German thrash? Well, this is band number 3 in that category, and it is none other than Destruction. Now, these guys are unique. Now, one thing I do love about the German Big Four of thrash is, although all of them are extreme and aggressive and angry in their own way, the types of melodies and the types of approaches they do with this music is incredible. There's a lot of diversity. There's a lot of great, really tonal significance in a lot of their work. I listened to some of Destruction's more recent stuff, and I thought it was absolutely phenomenal. When you're talking about Destruction in regards to the German Big Four thrash, when it comes down to it, the big two, the ones that won the biggest and the baddest and the best, are always going to be Creator, and it's always going to be Sodom. I feel like in recent times, though, Destruction has really upped their game. They're extremely consistent. Their work has gotten better and better, and that's from both fans and critics alike. The production value, the sound, everything is just, they just keep leveling themselves up. The frontman and bassist Schmier is a legend, a household name. But when it comes to it, I feel like they were kind of in that overshadowed category between, right underneath Sodom and Creator. So for that reason alone, they get a B, but they're at the top of the B. They're a B++. Wait, where did I put Sodom? Did I put Sodom in this? Hold on, I'm rethinking this. No, Sodom's on A, so yeah, B's right. Okay, I was trying to get them into A tier, but alas, the facts don't support it. I don't know how I feel about Death Clock being on this list. They're a fictitious band, a Norwegian extreme death/black metal band, but I gotta hand it to you guys for a cartoon to affect pop culture and open a wider audience's eyes to that Scandinavian extreme death and black metal, and to popularize it the way they did with that incredible story that shows the cultural significance of a fictitious band. Now, this fictitious band is made of some really incredible musicians, most notably Brendan Small and Brian Beller. I forget who their drummer is. I don't know why that keeps slipping my mind. And they've released like 4 or 5 albums, and they actually go on tour. These guys actually continue the legacy of the band on tour. They have massive shows. They're globally and culturally significant. That being said, they're not a real band. However, the metal community loves them. You can't deny them. And I feel like they've opened the door to make black metal more accessible, especially in America. They are culturally significant, but as far as influential, I don't think anybody really takes them that seriously to become influenced by a cartoon band. But cultural significance is really up there. They're unavoidable. I'm going to put them at a B, and I feel like that's being very generous. But you cannot deny the reality of how, just how culturally significant they are. And they've repopularized a very niche form of heavy metal that's been around for a long time, and they made it mainstream in a way that, honestly, I feel is a surprise to everyone. You got to give them respect, but I'm going to put them on the lower end of the B tier. Because, honestly, this band isn't real. And I don't see a lot of people actually saying my main influences are Deathclock. And I feel like that lowers it. But but you gotta give them credit and respect for being a cartoon fiction band to have this much relevance in the United States, being as extreme as their music is. That's legend status, if you ask me. It's weird, but it's legend status. Speaking of legend status, this next band needs no introduction, and that is Dimmu Borgir. You want to talk about symphonic, progressive black metal? We talked about Cradle of Filth, I want to say, in the first video. And in that, I mentioned the two biggest black metal bands of all time when it comes to availability, accessibility, global significance, and cultural influence. It was Cradle of Filth and Dimmu Borgir. And that still stands. Nobody popularized and mainstreamed this extreme form of music quite like they did. And they're still extremely relevant, even though I don't know how active the band is. That being said, these guys are absolute legends. They've opened the door in a very big way. They've drawn a lot of controversy as well as a lot of large crowds. No one has done black metal in the same way these two bands have done. And I don't know if there's anybody that can do it that big and that bad and that globally acknowledged and known as those two bands. They recreated and redefined the black metal genre. They popularized it in a way, honestly, I don't think most people thought possible. And they're still relevant and highly influential. Dimmu Borgir gets an S tier rating. You cannot deny the impact they've had on music and especially on black metal. Oh, there's some S's this time around. So far, 3 S's. That's better than usual. Dismember. Okay. This band predates the Gothenburg trio of the early mid-90s. This is one of, again, another big four. Everybody has a big four, apparently. This is the big four Swedish death metal. If you didn't have the big four Swedish death metal in the mid to late 80s, there would not have been a Gothenburg movement in the early mid-90s. And this is one of those bands that was right at the beginning, Swedish death metal, extreme metal. They helped form the sound that was later to become the Gothenburg movement. Unfortunately, again, what happens with a lot of these other bands is you have a big four or a big three, and then a couple of those bands significantly outweighs the other. Dissection is one of those bands. Dismember is one of those bands that kind of gets overshadowed by some of the bigger players of the movement. That being said, I feel like their contributions to music, because you still hear about them, they're still relevant, although their listener and fan pool has definitely decreased in the modern time. I'm going to say that Dismember is deserving of either a C or a B because they did help forge that movement. But they are rather obscure. This is why I get gray hairs, y'all. I feel like B is putting them way too high on the list. I'm not going to lie to you guys. Especially as hard as they got snowed. I'm going to put them on the same level as Cathedral. They are at the bottom of the C tier due to lack of global significance, availability, accessibility. Bands get overshadowed all the time. Is Dismember an important band? Absolutely. You cannot take away their contributions, but there are other bands in that movement that did it bigger, better, and reached a higher level of significance and influence. You can't argue with the facts. Dismember is a very well-respected and significant character in the Swedish death metal movement, but they just never achieved the same heights as some of those other bands, and they are also to come. All right, and carrying on to our next band, which is actually one of the most relevant and significant figures of metal. We're talking about the queen of metal herself, Mrs. Doro Pesch. She needs no introduction. People know her from her work in her 80s band Warlock, which is where I first heard of her. I remember hearing the song All We Are when I was like 15 and being absolutely blown away, not only by the musicianship, but by her voice. She has a very iconic and important voice. She's extremely relevant now. She has an incredible solo career that she started in the 90s that's continuing into the now. Her contributions not only to music, but to culture overall has dubbed her the Queen of Metal. She's earned that. She's done a lot for female-fronted heavy metal. When we were talking about, I want to say Kitty, or another one of those female-fronted bands from like the 2000s or early 90s, I said something to the effect that they did not create or even pioneer female-fronted heavy metal, and she is the reason why I said that. Doro Pesch did a lot, and in the 80s, what you guys don't realize, in the 80s, having a female singer was incredibly unpopular, was incredibly not seen, but Doro didn't really care about the fashion. Warlock was a great band, and I feel as she continued to fight against the adversity of being a woman in a male-dominated form of music, she has created, a very true form of heavy metal. She's always been true to herself. Her music and her voice only get better with time. Her tours and concerts are just phenomenal. The crowd goes nuts no matter where she's at. And honestly, guys, cultural significance is like a 10 out of 10. If you didn't have Doro Pesch, you wouldn't have any real female-fronted heavy metal if she hadn't have fought the way for all those other bands to follow. Doro Pesch is a legend and a goddess, in my opinion. The facts back it up. I mean, we can't give her any less than an S, because she flew the flag for females in heavy metal. She had a very successful career with Warlock, even bigger success in her solo band. She's known worldwide, worshipped, and respected. Doro is an S. S-Train is rolling today, y'all. Let's see, what is this? Draconian. Guys, I've never heard of them. Alright, it goes straight into no context. And the next band is one of my all-time favorite bands. I love these guys. And I mentioned them, I want to say, in the first video. When we were talking about Tobias Sammet's Avantasia. It might have been the second or third video, I don't remember. This is the OG band of Tobias Sammet. This is Avantasia, one of the most prolific, legendary, and influential heavy metal bands of all time in the power metal genre. These guys were inspired by Halloween, Iron Maiden, Priest, you name it. They've sold millions of records worldwide. Highly regarded as one of the best bands of the late 90s and 2000s. Giants in the power metal community. Pretty much helped redefine what power metal would be in the first phase of their career. They've done some more hard rock stuff in the early mid-2000s. And then, of course, they've kind of gotten more into progressive and melodic metal as time goes on. But that being said, Edguy is one of the most noteworthy legends of the power metal genre. Tobias Sammet's original dream child, one of the most impactful musicians in metal. And again, no matter what Tobias Sammet does, he cannot escape the shadow of what he created in Edguy. And don't get me wrong, Avantasia is huge. It's worldwide. It's significant. But again, Toby can't say a word about Avantasia without being flogged numerous times with when we get a new Edguy album. The Edguy fans are starved, myself included, even though I'm fat, are starved for Edguy music. They are starved for more of the band they love, because Edguy is that band that you can't get enough of. Although the last couple of releases were a little wonky, everybody just loves Edguy. And and the sad thing is Tobias Sammet has become so focused on Avantasia. Nothing wrong with Avantasia. I do like them a lot. That he is not anymore really focusing on Edguy. He doesn't feel, quote, it's the right thing to do. I mean, the last album came out from 2014, the Space Police album. The last full-length record, that is. They've done like Monuments after that, I do believe. And that was a decent album. It was more of a return to form for them. And honestly, ever since then, I've been wanting more. And so apparently has the rest of the world. And for their influence and impact on heavy metal, I got to give them an S. Okay. Enslaved. All right. You're talking about, I want to say this is Norwegian death metal. I mean, not Norwegian death metal, but Norwegian black metal. Enslaved is a very common name. Did they revolutionize or reinvent the genre? No. Are they one of the most respected and consistent bands of the genre? Yes. And they're also very popular even now. They have a global fan base that kind of speaks for themselves. They've got a lot of records underneath their belt. They're an older band. Honestly, there's really not a lot of hate when it comes to Enslaved. You're hard-pressed to find a more consistent band that releases consistently good music and also retains significance and relevance and popularity. And for that, I feel like they deserve to be higher than most of those other bands because you still hear about them. They're unavoidable. They are legend status for a reason. So Enslaved deserves somewhere between a C and a B. I feel like C is too low because of how popular and how significant they are. But there's no real influence in reinventing the wheel, so to speak. There's no real pioneering spirit, no revolutionizing, not a lot of influencing. There is a difference between being revolutionary and being popular. But these guys are somewhat of a best in class. Not exactly best in class, but close. Again, this is why. This is why I have gray hair. This is why I wear a ball cap. Because I'm bald. Anyhow. Enslaved. I hate this. Enslaved is either a C or a B. This is starting to look like last video now. Who's in the C? Burning Witches, Anger, A Battle Beast, Bullet from a Valentine, Death Heaven, Sheenhead Ministry. Yeah, they're a little more relevant than that. I'll say they're on the same tier as these B bands, but they're at the very end of the B. They are so close to being C, it's not even funny. But consistency, availability, and relevance is not something you get from a lot of these bands. And I feel like that has to be noted. They're trusted. They are a very powerful force of the genre. Are they legendary, revolutionary? Not really. But you're hard-pressed to find a band that is that consistent and that successful. Moving on. Okay, we just previously talked about the big four of Sweden death metal. This band predates, again, the Gothenburg trio, the Gothenburg movement, rather. This is Entombed, and these guys are giants. When you talk about changing the way a particular genre of music sounds, okay, take an important record. Like, again, Slaughter of the Soul, At the Gates, one of the most seminal and timeless masterpieces of the Swedish death metal movement, and death metal in general. And there's that certain tone that you come to expect out of Swedish death metal, and that's what's considered the buzzsaw tone. You know, for my guitar playing friends, you know that's the HM2 through, I haven't forgot what kind of amp, but the HM2 pedal is the buzzsaw sound of Swedish death metal. And the band that originated that sound, that buzzsaw sound that so many bands, including the Gothenburg trio, copied and popularized, came from Entombed. Entombed is the actual parent or progenitor of that sound. If it wasn't for Entombed, you wouldn't have the melodic and, technical death metal that came out of Sweden, those important releases, the worldwide influence. It all started with Entombed. And for that, they changed, heavy metal and death metal in a huge way. They invented a whole new sound. And for that, that is the spirit of S tier. And they are getting an absolute S. Like, you cannot deny the impact and the again, this is the reinventing the wheel that I'm telling you guys about. This is taking music and creating something new, something different, trailblazing, and extraordinary, and no one did it quite like Entombed. All right, moving on. Ex-Hoarder. That's a weird one to say. Ex-Hoarder is actually a very prominent, popular, and legendary metal band. I want to say in part 4, we discussed a Louisiana heavy metal band named Acid Bath. When you want to talk about New Orleans, when you want to talk about Louisiana and heavy metal, it all started with Ex-Hoarder. And Kyle, oh Lord, I forget his last name. I think Kyle Thomas is a household name in heavy metal. One of the hardest working musicians in the entire hardcore, groove metal scene. Ex-Hoarder took the elements of speed and thrash and blended it with groove. They are actually, they're actually a lot like Entombed, the progenitors, the creators of the groove metal sound. The sound that was popularized by almost every hardcore band of the 90s, including Machine Head and Pantera. Now that being said, Pantera claims there's no influence on Ex-Hoarder, but you want to talk about, which that may be true, I don't know. But you want to talk about New Orleans heavy metal, people like Down and Crowbar, they wouldn't have had a fighting chance of making it anywhere if Ex-Hoarder hadn't done what they did in the late 80s. You say you're a fan of groove metal, you know where it all began? It began with Ex-Hoarder in 1988. True legendary musicians combining their influences with killer groove and honestly influencing numerous popular bands for decades and decades and decades to come. And they are still relevant and active and still massively influential. Again, this is what the S tier is all about. Ex-Hoarder is definitely an S tier band. Fallujah. Okay. You hear about these guys. They are deathcore, I do believe. Or progressive / death metal. They're from New Jersey, if I recall correctly. Now, again, these guys didn't reinvent the wheel. But when you talk about consistency, respected band, decent following, mainstream, it doesn't get, any better and more consistent and more solid than Fallujah. They're probably one of the most consistent and solid bands of their genre against pretty much any of them. The fans love them. The critics do too. As far as being influential, they're kind of low on those numbers. And honestly, a lot of the other bands in that particular genre of progressive and death metal kind of outweigh them. But they are one of the most consistent, respected, and honestly decent bands. They're mainstream, which puts them ahead of the other dependable bands that usually fall in the D tier. Fallujah gets a C. And I think they deserve like a good C, like just a straight C or maybe a C+. Because again, when it comes down to dependable, consistent, respected bands, they weren't pioneers, but they don't have to be. Most of those bands don't come with, an extended sense of relevance or popularity. These guys do. So that is deserving of a C tier because they're mainstream, they're popular, and they're dependable, incredibly accessible, and still kicking. Can't beat it. What is that? First fragment. What this isn't going to be is the first fragment to fall into no context. Guys, I need help. Please. Okay. Oh yeah, Fit for an Autopsy. This is a massively significant band, extreme metal band from the U.S. You guys see their names everywhere. They're massive headlining tours. They're incredibly popular and significant. I want to say they're, again, a progressive death metal or deathcore band. A lot of these guys are about the same to me, and I apologize. I'm not super familiar or even much of a fan of those very extreme forms of music. But these guys are super well respected, incredibly significant. I mean, from the time they first fell on scene, these guys were just really created a great ripple. I think they are moderately influential. They're incredibly mainstream. They're very popular. They're very consistent. They didn't extremely reinvent the wheel. I'll tell you that. But they are probably one of the best in class when it comes to it. These guys are they're just reappearing. You can't avoid them. So, what is this? Fit for an Autopsy gets a B. But I'll say they're a high B. They're a B++. Let's put them right behind Dark Tranquility. No, that's an A. Oh, hold on, sorry. Well, let's put them right behind Destruction. Because I think in time they'll get to that A status. I don't know if they'll necessarily get to S, because I don't think they have pioneered nearly that heavily. But when it comes to, again, being a very well recognized, moderately influential, very active and significant, you see them everywhere. Like, they are headlining these tours. They pull in big festivals. They're not going anywhere. They're very much champions of the genre. You can't deny them a high tier rating. And I think in time that rating's only going to increase. Flesh God Apocalypse. You know what? I made a mistake. I looked at the wrong part. These guys actually are an A. Oh, wait, that's the wrong band. Good Lord. I'm sorry, you guys. I'm having technical difficulties. Where did I put them? Fit for an Autopsy is A. I'm sorry. They are part of the most... I don't know what part I was looking at, but because I am having to refer to my research. Again, guys, I'm sorry. This is kind of live. When it comes to them, they do deserve an A tier because of just how much they bring in. They're one of the most successful acts in America. I didn't feel like it felt exactly right to put them in a B tier, and that's why. So they are definitely an A tier band. Sorry if I offended any Fit for an Autopsy fans. These guys are definitely A. They're not going anywhere. Again, are they S tier? No. Are they going to be S tier? I don't think so. The part where I was telling you guys about pioneering and revolutionizing, that part still remains true. But when you're talking about some of the most successful bands of the current day, carrying the torch, I mean, again, you see them everywhere. They're bringing in festivals, headlining shows, and these crowds are not small. They're massively relevant. Hard to find a band of that nature to do it in the way that they have. Very deserving A tier. Flesh God Apocalypse. These guys are interesting. Flesh God Apocalypse is a symphonic death metal band from Italy. We got some Italian metal back. I don't think we've had Italian metal since Rhapsody. Anyhow, these guys are symphonic, progressive death metal. These guys are actually becoming more and more popular. I've been seeing their names everywhere, apparently for the past year and a half. These guys are just breaking boundaries. They do have a female in the band. I'm not really sure what her role is, but they're very diverse. They put on an incredible stage show performance. And the short time that they've been around, they've just been accelerating. They're doing something really new. And that's the general consensus of both fans and critics alike. They're exploring new territories within the death metal genre. They're not they don't really like being considered technical death metal. They're not plain death metal, but they are symphonic, and their symphonic influences oftentimes create pagan and or gothic vibes with their sound. But these guys are doing something that no one else is doing with death metal, and I feel like that's creating a bigger buzz around them, making them a new sort of band on the rise. These guys are hot. They're everywhere. And I feel like in time they may reach that coveted S tier. Because honestly, when you take a look at what they're doing, no one else is doing what they're doing. Not to the level that they are either. You got to respect that. But for right now, while they're still building relevance and repertoire, I've got to give them a B tier. I'm going to put them at the front of the B tier because they've rose to fame so quickly and rose to relevance so quickly, and they haven't lost any steam. Again, these guys are getting huge in a very short amount of time. It's probably not going to take long before they're at the top of the charts, honestly. Okay, Freedom Call. This is probably the band that I have underestimated the most. I did not realize how relevant these guys were. I've heard a couple of their songs and I generally wasn't extremely impressed. But whenever you look at power metal as a whole, these guys show up as one of the first artists underneath the genre, underneath that flag. They are incredibly important and relevant. And while I don't necessarily agree with their style, the releases are respected. They are best in class. Did they absolutely revolutionize the power metal genre? Not really. But are they one of the most respected and significant and relevant bands of power metal? Yes. And I didn't realize they were extremely relevant today. But then again, I haven't really been paying attention to them either. But for that, they get an A tier. Again, this one's kind of a surprise to me because I really haven't heard much about them, especially here recently. But they are bigger than ever and they deserve respect. All right. And next band on the list is Funeral Mist. I'm assuming that's Doom. I have no idea. And guys, that rounds out the 7th. Oh Lord, I think that's the 7th column. Yes. That rounds out the 7th line of no context artists. So that means we're about to start the 8th row. Please, guys, if you have any idea of any of these bands factually regarding their significance or their range of influence, anywhere that I can put them on the list, please let me know because this no context bracket is going to new heights. What we got here? Gay area? Jerry? Well, it looks like we just started the 8th no context bracket. Okay, Gorguts. This is a very, very significant and powerful band. When you're talking about extreme metal, death metal from Canada, no one has become, honestly, more influential. Now, these guys have honestly faded in significance, especially in recent times, in modern day. But you still hear about them. They're still of legend status. And honestly, Gorguts really did pave the way for these Canadian extreme metal acts to follow. You wouldn't have had the kind of success from Cataclysm if you did not have Gorguts predating them. They are a band from the late 80s, I do believe. I think they're still active and alive and kicking now. But they were the first Canadian death metal band to break boundaries, especially still a consistent audience in the U.S. and overseas. They've mainstreamed and popularized a very extreme form of heavy metal. And I feel like if Gorguts hadn't have contributed in the way that they have, again, some of your more prominent extreme metal artists from Canada wouldn't exist. So for those reasons alone, Gorguts does get an S tier band. They're still really considered one of the most important bands of the death and extreme metal genres. And guys, again, this is a very hallmark sort of band. It doesn't get any more iconic, legendary, or trailblazing for that particular area of the world and for that particular style of music than Gorguts. Okay, we're back to the big four of the Swedish death metal movement of the early mid-80s, and this is Grave. And right now their circumstances are quite grave. I don't know if you've heard about this, but like half of the band just quit like a week ago. It might have been longer, I'm not sure. And I think like only the singer remains and somebody else. So I don't know what causes a band, or half your band, to quit just suddenly. But these guys are kind of in dire straits. All their shows that have been scheduled are canceled. And honestly, up until this controversy with the Grave, I haven't heard about them honestly at all. And when you research them, again, they were with Dismember. They were with Entombed. They're part of that big four of Swedish heavy metal. However, I will say they're probably the most snowed out of the big four. A lot of inconsistency. I think they disbanded somewhere in the 90s and then they came back, and it's very much sort of a cancer situation with Grave. So I feel like because they are part of that revolution, they don't really necessarily deserve an F tier, even though I feel like they do belong there based on their relevance and significance. But for the same reasons as Cancer, Grave is honestly a D. Oh wait, no, I did put Cancer in the F. All right, so Grave has to go in F too. I'm sorry, guys. I'm kind of losing it here. They're very much the same situation. I understand they're part of the Big Four. That alone makes me want to put them in a D because they contributed to the movement. Again, this is why I'm growing gray hairs, like I'm a gray hair farmer. Okay, I'm going to put them out of the F tier. I'm going to put them back. I know. This takes time if you want to do it right, guys. And it also takes sweat and stress and pulling your hair out. Just like that, but without the hat on. They're getting a D. I am unhinged. I hope you notice. And enjoy. So yeah, Grave is a D tier band. And they're at the ass end of D because, again, people have let the sleep on this band for a long time. The only thing that's saving them is the fact that they are one of the originators of Swedish death metal, which is hugely and insanely popular. But they're like the least loved. It's kind of Grave. I'm sorry, guys. What is this? Gulax. It sounds like what happens after you take like Senecot or magnesium citrate. It sounds like you're going to be on the toilet. Anyhow, okay, talk about an iconic band. This is Gwar. Gwar is from Richmond, Virginia. Yep, in Virginia, just like I am, but not in Richmond. They're from Richmond, Virginia. They're probably one of the biggest, most successful parody metal bands of all time. They have an insane stage presence. They're probably one of the most iconic bands of all time. But as far as influence goes, I don't really think they're influential. It's comedy metal. They have a revolving cast of musicians and singers and whatnot. I feel like, I don't know if you guys know about this Norwegian or Finnish metal band, Lordi. Gwar started that sort of demonic, sort of silly demon look for costumes. It's a shock rock sort of thing. So if Gwar didn't exist, you wouldn't have had Lordi, if you guys know who I'm talking about. A very much derivative of Gwar, if I do say so myself. But as far as content, legacy, body of work, I mean, none of their stuff really stuck. It wasn't serious music. But I think the way they presented their music is their legacy. Everybody knows who Gwar is. Everybody knows what a Gwarbecue is. They weren't meant to be taken seriously, but I feel like they did do something no one else has ever done before as far as presentation and stage show and just what they do. Like, they're incredibly unique. So for that, they are a D tier, and I just don't feel like it's just to give them anything higher. Because, you know, more or less how they present their music. Alright guys, well that's it for me. This concludes part 6 of our seemingly never-ending Tiermaker Saga. And if you like this video or this kind of content, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Again, any sort of input or conversation, please join the discussion on these videos. I do love hearing from you guys. And please, do not forget to check out the playlist I created for this called the Tiermaker Saga. All the videos that are part of this series will be in that playlist in case you missed them when they come out. Or if you are new to the series, please check out that playlist and start from the beginning. So that way all of this makes sense, because we are covering a lot of ground. That being said, I feel like we should have gotten a little bit more done today, but this was a very prominent list of artists that had to be spoken for. So I feel like we did all these bands justice and were accurate with just a fair amount of stress. Alright guys, until next time, this is your boy Marc, and you have a great week.